Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Wrestling Interviews with James. And today with me, I've got the esteemed newsletter writer of 38 years and counting. I hope I'm right saying that. 38
Yes,
years.
you are right. Wow.
Big Dave Meltzer. How are you, Big Dave?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm boiling here, man, actually. I've got to say, I put the heating on like 3 hours for some stupid reason. So that's why I'm like, you can't tell, but I'm orange with heat.
Oh, wow. Wow.
But I'm doing all right at the moment. Right, so when did so obviously you come on to plug the book a little bit. So when did it come out for starters? And when did the first one come out? Because I actually read the '93 one first, and then I checked recently that you've got the '97 one out as well. This is the Wrestling Observer newsletter yearbook.
Yeah. I think that the first book came out around September, and then the '93 book we came out a couple weeks before Christmas. So those are the two. But yeah, I'm thinking about September. Yeah.
Right, so I did the stupid thing because I emailed you a couple of days ago to do the interview, and my book for '97 didn't come in time. So I've gone through all of '93 to research for it.
That's
So
fine.
it's completely ridiculous. But the first things first, I suppose, is the very first thing that I ever wrote that that I ever read that you wrote was the two-part special almost on the Montreal Screw Job, and it was actually on Bret Hart's website. I think you allowed him to print it all, and it's still one of the best things I've ever written. It's so comprehensive. My question is, because it's actually, and I totally agree with you that it should be that way, is it's heavily slanted toward Bret Hart's point of view, and I agree that it should be. In the 25 years since, has your stance sort of softened or mellowed Vince McMahon's opinion or side?
Well, I mean, it's pretty much straight on like what it was. I mean, when I first heard from WWE before I ever heard from Bret, for like Bruce Pritchard and other people in WWE, and kind of got that side. And then I talked to Bret the day after and talked to him and at length. And I mean, the key thing, I mean, as far as like, I get both sides of it, but I think that, if you're going to really like look at it, I mean, so much of the stuff that people use to defend the Vince side is based on stuff that simply isn't true. Like he was going to go to WCW the next day, which was never going to happen, or that this, Montreal was not, I mean, it ended up being his last match, but he was actually booked for another month. I mean, that's the one thing. It's like, it was never him refusing to lose. I mean, he absolutely refused to lose that match on that day, but it was never about him refusing to lose. If he had said, if it was one of those things where, and this is what I was first told, and this is what the wrestlers were told too, is that he refused to lose the championship in the ring. If he had done that, I would have, even with the creative control aspect of the contract, I would have said he was in the wrong. But it was never about that. It was a series of weird situations where, because of what Sean said to him and because of other things that had happened, like even later in the week, I just think there's a lot of minor parts that always get overlooked over the idea that Bret wouldn't do the job. I mean, if you put that same situation with, I don't care if it was Harley Race or Jack Briscoe or Bruno Sammartino in that same situation, none of them would have lost either in that situation where the other guy goes, I'm not going to put you over. And then, Vince, the Wednesday before, I mean, he had the answer. He went to Sean and goes like, if you lose first, he'll lose on the way out. And Sean said no. So at that point, it's kind of like, I don't know where the issue is with Bret. I mean, a lot of people have made the issue with Bret and made it the simplified version is a lot easier to take Vince's side on, but it really wasn't a simplified version. It was a very complicated version. There's really a lot of details that, between the contract situation and, the creative control, which was a big key. And, but, on Vince's side, he was leaving. And, so, I mean, yeah, it's, but no, I mean, I would say that the opinion that I had probably by Wednesday of that week or Tuesday of that week, for the most part, even with stuff I've learned since, it's pretty much the same opinion, yeah.
You'll probably know this probably almost better than anyone, I suppose, maybe than Vince himself, but was he really close to downsizing into a Northeastern promotion, or was that just a line spun to Bret at the time to make him feel bad and take the lower offer?
Yeah, I don't think that they ever would have done that. I mean, they may have had to downsize. I mean, there was a point where they were losing money, and there was a point where they were downsizing. They were making cuts. They cut people's salaries and things like that. They did have to take out loans. by the time Montreal came along, that was already taken care of because they raised the price of the pay-per-views, the B pay-per-views, and the numbers of who bought the B pay-per-views also went up. So they were profitable by then. A couple months earlier, when they took out the loans, they were not profitable. When they asked Brett originally to take the pay cut, they were not profitable at that time, and they had to take out loans. But I mean, as far as becoming a Northeast regional company, that wasn't going to happen because economically, regional wrestling died a decade earlier. You couldn't go backwards. If Vince tried to go backwards, I mean, yeah, you know, he would have gotten killed by WCW if he had retrenched. WCW would have taken over the whole country, and he couldn't afford that to happen at that point.
Why do you think so many wrestlers, especially in the last few years, have come out and said, "Oh, it's a work. It never happened. Come on, it worked out too perfectly." I even interviewed Savio Vega a couple of weeks ago, and he said, "I was in the arena. I saw Vince McMahon wobbling out after Brett punched him, and I just went, he looked like he was acting, so I don't believe it." So how come so many people?
Well, you know, I mean, wrestlers are used to being skeptical of everything. I mean, I remember when I remember hanging out with wrestlers telling me the NFL was a work too. You know, so it's like. I mean, it wasn't. I mean, it's like there's a lot of legal documentation of it, you know, which doesn't happen with the work. I mean, with the work, you know, like with Hulk Hogan when he did the same thing. I mean, his lawsuits, you know, with Turner and everything, that laid everything out was a work. But with Brett, it was the exact opposite. So no, it wasn't. I actually think that like wrestlers who think it was, I kind of feel sorry for them because it's like. You've got to be really deluded to still think that at this point.
So the first year I started watching wrestling was actually 1993. So I've been scanning through your first. I suppose it wasn't actually your first yearbook, was it? Because you actually did them in the 80s, I believe, and released them yearly, didn't you?
Yeah. I did them from like maybe 85 to 1990, and then I vowed I would never do another one ever again. And you know, then, you know, the people inside the ropes and, you know, they kind of, you know, came up with the idea of this and it worked out. The first two books did well. So we're probably going to do more.
Well, so I've been reading all through 93, like I just said, and it was my first year as a fan. I was wondering because I don't remember, obviously as a kid I wouldn't have heard it anyway, but obviously the 1993 was like rock with scandals, you know, stemming from like the last year or two with Tom Cole and Ultimate Warrior started suing them and the federal investigation and everything. Why did that not affect the popularity of the WWF in the UK? Do you know? Because I never remember hearing anything on the news about any of that.
Maybe because you never heard that. You know, because I remember that there was a point. There's actually two times. There was that point in the 90s, and then there was another point in the like 2003, I think, where. You know, it was seriously like, I mean, it was never like it was going to happen, but I mean, I talked to people in the company. It was like, you know, we may end up being this touring European promotion, you know, and work a lot more in Europe because the United States was doing so badly at those 2 points in time. But yeah, I'd say 92 after Hogan. I mean, the thing with WWF in the United States is, you know, when you look back on it historically, they had built everything around Hogan from 84 on. And when Hogan left, which was WrestleMania 1982, I think that more than anything else, it's just that lack of Hogan, just the whole thing. I don't want to say collapsed because that's too strong of a word, but it went way down. And I think that's because it was so much star driven by the one star. And I think it's one of the reasons why Vince, you know, number one, he won't make that larger than life superstar. He'll try to make 5 or 6 guys or 10 guys or whatever, because even if it's not as big, you know, like John Cena left and the business didn't go to hell. Hulk Hogan left and the business went to hell. So I think that was a learning experience.
Well, actually, sort of preempted my next question there. So how, with all the scandals and lawsuits and everything, and Geraldo Rivera, and we never got that guy. What was the guy with the mustache?
Geraldo Rivera.
Thank you. Was that the one? You weren't on that one, were you?
I didn't do Geraldo Rivera. I was on with Phil Donahue.
Phil Donahue.
I
suppose my ignorance here slightly.
Which they were both very famous guys in the 90s at the time. Yeah.
The question I was going to ask is, how much did that actually affect wrestling's popularity in the United States? Because obviously, as I said, it didn't really affect the UK at all. But was it more Hogan leaving, or
I think it's more Hogan. I think it's more Hogan leaving and the bloom being off the Hogan rose. Because when Hogan came back, it didn't go up nearly as much as we thought it would, and then Hogan left again because it didn't. You know, I mean, things had changed. But I think that. I think that all of that, like I said, like Hogan had this, like he was still popular to wrestling fans, but I think to the public, it was kind of like, oh, the guy who lied about steroids. So it really hurt his drawing power outside of the hardcore wrestling fans who didn't care. So I think that, and in turn, because WWF was built around him, that was, they felt the brunt of not having that big star because Vince, whatever the deal was for 92. And I don't know. I mean, Vince was talking to me at the time, and I remember him calling me and saying, that Hogan's going to be done at WrestleMania. I was shocked. But then after thinking about it, I wasn't, because Hogan had become a lightning rod. And I think Vince felt it was better for him to go away. And I think Vince wanted Hogan. He never told me this. My sense was that Vince wanted Hogan to go to that WrestleMania in 92 and retire and be sympathetic and then stay out a year so people would come back. When he came back a year later for the next WrestleMania, everybody would be excited and they would forget about the scandal. That's what I thought Vince wanted. But then Hogan refused to retire on that show and just kind of left. And so it was kind of like this muddled thing. So when he came back, yeah, it was big, but it didn't, but when he came back, it wasn't the same Hulk Hogan as far as like people were concerned. The business for that WrestleMania was still good, but when he started running around at the house shows, with Yokozuna, it didn't draw well at all. And then, because of that, him and Vince figured they had to move on from Hogan and go to Brett, and Hogan just decided he'd rather leave than lose to Brett.
Yeah, it was in Europe, I think, his last match for the WWF for like nearly 10 years, whatever it was as well. He did the European tour and he went.
He did the European tour, and then that was it, right? Right. I think that it was before, because I think it was I actually think that I first heard from Jimmy Hart, who had told me, it's like, yeah, he's going to do the European tour and he's gone. And I was thinking, gone? You know what I mean? It's like I was shocked. And then, in time, it all kind of came out as to why. And it's like, then I understood Hogan wanted to be the top guy, and Vince had figured the Hogan day was over and it was time for Brett, and Hogan just didn't want to be around.
All right, so I'm going to go on a slight detour. It is Hulk Hogan related, so I'm sorry for boring you on Hulk Hogan, but Greg Gagne gave an interview a few years ago, and he claimed, and I've even got the numbers in front of me, and I even read the interview, saw the interview today, so I didn't get it wrong. He claimed in 1991 the AWA was going to restart, and that they had lured Hulk Hogan over for $6 million over 4 years to restart the AWA. Have you ever heard of that rumor, or is that just Greg? I even asked Larry Zbyszko, and he's right. It's probably just Greg making nonsense up.
It sounds like just making stuff up, because something that big, if it would have happened at the time, I can't imagine I wouldn't have heard. I can't even imagine, because, I was connected with everybody. And if Hogan would have heard the story, I'd have certainly heard, whether it was from Jimmy Hart or from people who talked to Hogan, other people who talked to Hogan and other people from WWE and whatever. It's like, so I would put no credence in that. I heard of a million different things that Hogan was up to in that period. There was always different ideas, and people were always throwing stuff at him, for sure. These things that, you hear about, but they never come through. But that wasn't one of them. There was never one with Vern Gagne and Greg Gagne. That's for sure.
Fair enough then. Right, I'm going to go straight to 1993's books. It's fresh in my mind, and I've got a bone to pick with you. How could you have given Clash of the Champions 24 a thumbs down when it had the greatest segment in wrestling history?
Are you talking about the Shockmaster?
The Shockmaster, of course I'm talking about the Shockmaster. How could you give it a thumbs down?
Yeah, that was amazing. It's funny, because when that happened, I was like, but that's a really weird idea. You know what I mean? I thought that was supposed to happen that way when I saw it, because everything in wrestling is planned, right? And I go like, boy, I think Dusty might have been booking then. And I was thinking like, Dusty's a creative guy, and it's like, that's a weird idea. But yeah, WCW had, it's interesting. WCW had so many great matches, but they had so many misfires too.
It's man, I tell you, you can just keep going into that segment, and you watch. I don't even know what to compare it to. It's like an onion. You just keep peeling the layers back, and there's something else to laugh at. It's only like 10 times through that you realise, even if it had gone really well, it was still Fred Ottman in a Stormtrooper helmet with the jeans he drove to the arena in.
Yeah, no, I know. It was like the whole idea of that character, and that character didn't last very long, that's for sure. But that whole character was just incredible, I guess, in hindsight. Incredible that it was greenlit.
Well, I'd love that thing where Dusty goes, I woke up in a cold sweat thinking about it. Actually, he thought about that with the Chamber of Horrors as well, so that was...
Oh, that was brutal.
So back to... still into 93. I've got a load of Hulk Hogan questions, but I'll probably just skip through those. One thing I didn't realise was, reading through the book, is that Vince McMahon voluntarily stepped down as head of WWF. It was... Why?
Was this when he stepped down as president?
Yeah. He stepped down as president and transferred it to Linda.
Right, with Linda. Okay, so that's because he was, I mean, he knew he was about to get indicted, or he had already gotten indicted, and so he was preparing for the worst. That's basically what it was. I mean, he brought in Jerry Jarrett. It's like I'm sure he hoped that it would never come to him going to jail, but he had to prepare for that possibility because, it's funny too because with the trial and everything, it's like when I look at the trial, I go like, God, I was there. I was like, why was he so worried? But then again, the trial was such an interesting. It was so interesting. But I mean, he never should have been charged. They didn't have evidence. They were close, but it wasn't close enough to put him on trial in my mind.
Were you actually sat in the gallery watching the trial?
Oh yeah, I watched not the entire trial, but I watched probably, I would say 3/4 of it, 2/3, 3/4. I missed the first couple of days, but I watched, from whatever day it was, whenever I got there, I was in Long Island for 2 weeks, watching every day. Yeah.
Do you remember who was, and I've got a name in mind, but do you remember who maybe was the least trustworthy in the dock giving evidence?
The least trustworthy. There were a lot of people that I thought were pretty untrustworthy, but, Kevin Wackholtz was probably the top one, but Patterson was pretty low too. I would say those two stood out to me as being the least trustworthy.
What did Nails say specifically?
Well, he said that Vince told him that he needed to get on steroids, and he's wearing this full body costume, so why would he? Plus, he said it like after 92 when Vince was telling everyone to get off steroids. So it was just like, completely ludicrous. But it actually, like, the New York Times had the big headline, first wrestler, to implicate Vince and telling him to get on steroids. And it's like, Vince may have told Rick Rude that. And I think in some form he did. Rick Rude always said he did, but then on the stand was kind of like, iffy about it. But and I knew Rick Rude would be because, Rick Rude had a saying about, like, you don't shit where you eat. And he didn't want to be on the stand. He didn't want to be bearing Vince. So he was as soft as he could, as was almost everyone, that was there. But yeah, that was, Rude was from years earlier, from that period of time, from 92 on, from late 92 on, there's no way Vince told anyone, especially Kevin Wackholtz, who he wouldn't have trusted anyway. And he was wearing a full bodysuit as his gimmick to actually get on steroids, because Kevin Wackholtz is 6'5", 300 pounds anyway. So it's not like he was some skinny guy or some small guy. He was a gigantic guy. He didn't have a great body. I mean, he didn't have a bad, I guess he had a good body, but it didn't matter anyway in that suit, whether he had a good body or a bad body. So what does it matter? Yeah.
Who do you think testimony maybe swayed the jury the most into Vince McMahon's favor? Would have been Hulk Hogan, maybe?
Hogan was definitely beneficial to Vince, which Vince never understood. Because I remember when the trial was over, all Vince did was bury Hogan for not telling the truth. And it's like, dude, he saved your ass. When put on the spot, he saved your ass. But yeah, maybe the most. I mean, the other witness, he was supposed to be like a major witness against Vince, and he certainly turned out not to be that.
Did you ever hear the story where when he was walking into court that day and the news cameras caught up to him, do you remember what he said to the news cameras, or do you not know the story?
Boy, I think tell me about it.
He told people to tune into the WCW pay-per-view coming up that Sunday.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he did. Because he was right about he was right about to have that match with Ric Flair. It was only a couple weeks later. Yeah, it was right before. That got a lot of heat too because it was like in the trial, he exposed himself as a steroid user, and there he was, WCW was bringing him in as the biggest star in the company, the biggest star in the world. And, he did help turn their business around for a couple of years too.
Right. I'm going to move on to a bit of a general newsletter stuff. So I was wondering, and if I ever get your I won't say partner, just, well, your working partner, Brian Alvarez, I'll ask him the same thing. But how does a young man, so this is almost 40 years ago when you started the Wrestling Observer newsletter, how does a young man go about gathering contacts to...
I don't even know it just happened. I mean, I was like the only one doing it at that point in time, and it was actually very beneficial to wrestling, although some people in wrestling didn't understand it then and don't even understand it now, but it really was. But yeah, it was the only thing of its type. And, I always say the smartest people in wrestling always gravitated towards me, and the ones who were the most easily manipulated were the ones who didn't. So that's kind of how it turned out to be, from then and on. It's like, it was the people who really wanted to know the business. We were talking all the time because I wanted to really know the business, and we were teaching each other the business. And the people who didn't understand the business, they just thought that you're exposing the business and missing the entire point. Because I was covering it as a business, and it's a real business. I mean, the between the ropes is what it is. I mean, it's not fake either, but it's, you know what I mean? But the business itself is a totally real business.
Yeah, it's like the most interesting business in the world for me because it's part circus, it's part rock and roll, it's part television, it's part sports. It's perfect for me. I couldn't be more interested. And yours is the only podcast I actually listen to, Wrestling Observer Radio. I won't miss one purely because I love the business aspect of it.
The business it's fascinating. Also, to me, the thing that was always fascinating to me, and this was from as a little kid, was what you do to get spectators to pay money to see what you do. And it's like what works and what doesn't work and what personalities work. And, the same thing that works 5 years ago doesn't necessarily work now. But to me, it's just a fascinating study because it always changes and you never know. And everything's a risk. Like if somebody knew or you had all the answers, you would just be, you'd make nothing but money, right? You never make a mistake, but there's no one. I mean, Vince McMahon's probably had more mistakes than successes in the big picture, but the successes are big enough to override the mistakes. And, there's been, there's luck run in and things like that. There's all, it's just a fascinating, the whole business fascinating story. It's had its ups and downs. I mean, there've been, like in the last 40 years, we've had some big ups and we've had some big downs and years and kind of in the middle. Now it's very lucrative. I mean, it's a very healthy financial business, but it's not nearly as popular as it used to be. And, and I don't know I don't know if the circumstances are that it could ever be as popular as it was in the late 90s. It's just a different time. Everything's more fragmented. It's like, are we ever going to have a rock band as big as the Beatles or Elvis? No. I mean, we'll have ones that you know what I mean? We'll have bands that gross more revenue because of higher ticket prices and, things like that. But I mean, as far as culturally, will we ever another Beatles? I don't think we ever will. I don't know that we may have another big sports star, like an NBA player or something like that, that's larger than life or but I don't think that we're ever going to have, I don't think we're ever going to have a level of popularity of pro wrestling like we had in the late 90s. There was just too many things that were happening that led that to happen. And they're not there now. I mean, television's too fragmented.
Elvis and the Beatles are always a bit of a. They almost looked out in a sense. I mean, apart from the fact that they're both amazing, is they looked out in a sense of the time they came because they were also like the edgiest performers of their day as well. So that meant just the kids loved them as well as their talents, obviously.
But see, that's what's so interesting to me is, and you know what? When wrestling was really big in the late 90s, it was a really edgy form of entertainment. And kids loved it. It's funny because they'll go like, oh, they weren't aiming at kids. And it's like hell they weren't. That's when 40% of their audience was kids.
Me.
People go, now they're aiming at kids. And it's like now the audience of kids is really low. I don't think it's ever been lower in my lifetime. And people go, oh, they're aiming at kids. It's like, no, actually they're aiming at not offending sponsors. It's a completely different thing. And if they're aiming at kids, boy, are they missing the boat because they're doing nothing that appeals to kids. I mean, I have two teenagers. Well, I have a teenager and a girl's 11. And, like wrestling's just it's not even in their world, which was funny because when I was that age, all we did was talk wrestling, especially when I was 11, it was like, that was like, literally all we did was talk wrestling and football and things like that.
Yeah, same with me. When I was 11, because I started watching 93, fell out of it a bit, and then I got back in 1998. Weirdly, because of Kane, The first Raw I watched back in '98 is the one where he was shooting lightning out and he set the guy on fire on the ramp. And for long-term wrestling fans, people would be like, "That is shit." But for me, as an 11, 12-year-old, I was like, "This is the greatest thing ever."
Yeah. I mean, when I would watch that, I was just like, oh God. And now if you do it, the thing now is if you do anything like that, everybody craps on everything. So it's like, it's really tough to do something new. And I mean, look at the guys now that are like the edgy guys and everything like that. It's like, they definitely get the reaction and the respect for it, but boy, do they get, I guess, you know what? I mean, I guess everyone would get negativity for it, but I guess just because it's so open and everything like that, you see so much more negativity than you did 15 years ago, let's say.
Well, I suppose it's easy to spread the negativity with social media these days as well.
Yeah, and also people who where it's the whole, not just social media but all media, where when the media stopped being the media and started being a gimmick, everything, the lies spread a lot faster than the truth, which is kind of a sad thing. But because I think before, the media was the ones that I mean, I'm not saying they always told the truth, but that was the goal in most of them, was really to be, tell the truth. And now it's just like, that's the thing that scares them the most, is telling the truth, because everyone's got an agenda, and you don't want the truth, because the truth is always different from your agenda. I mean, sometimes it coincides, but very often it's different. So you just try to hide it and spin it.
I'm going to go slightly back to the newsletters, because I did want to ask one thing. So, a few years ago, and this isn't the question you're going to think it's going to be. A few years ago, the star system was broken with a Kenny Omega match. I forget who it was.
Kenny Omega and Okada, the first one.
Yeah.
Which I mean, it really didn't break it, because I had the first one that I remember. Oh God, let me think about this. So I guess it would have been Flair and Steamboat in Baltimore or Landover. And then there was some Masao and Kawada and some other ones, but the Flair and Steamboat house show match was the first one that I would say broke the 5-star system, if that's what the term was. Although there was I was gonna say I guess like Norm Dooley, who did the system before I did, had already broken it for some Louisville matches in the '81, which I didn't even know about until a few years ago when Cornette told me. Now, Cornette told me, and now he's like mad at me for doing it when his freaking best friend did it 40 years ago.
I will ask about Jim in a minute. Well, actually, the question I was going to ask about the newsletter thing was how come, and I know why it isn't, but how come an average match isn't sort of right in the middle at what would be 5? Because you can do -5 or +5 if we're not going to break the system. So how come an average match isn't 0? And I know why it isn't, but how come it isn't, if you know what I'm
Well, I mean, you can do negative up to whatever. I think I did -459.4, whatever, like the absolute negative temperature was for, I don't remember if it was the Sheik and Volkov match at Heroes of Wrestling, which was ungodly awful. But but no, I mean, average is 2. That's how it's always been. And most matches are way above that, because the reality is most matches are above what used to be average. I mean, there's the mentality of the talent now. Before, a lot of the talent had the mentality of just like, fans are suckers and we do whatever it is to take their money and run along, right? And now this generation of wrestlers who grew up as fans, and their mentality is, oh man, I want to put on a show like the kinds of show I want to do, what I wish I could have seen when I was a fan. So they go out there and just do what, they just learn and they concentrate on their match, and the match is important. So yeah, the matches are much better now as a general rule. Not to say like the best matches of any era would still be the best among the best matches now, but the average match is much better than it was in the past, because in the past, the mentality is different. The guys study wrestling more, way more, not even, way more than ever before. And, it's the guys in the business who don't care about having good matches, they're not going to last today. The other wrestlers won't like it. The really lazy guys, the promotions won't like it. I mean, before, you could have awful matches, but if you could draw money, the promoters were just like, you're drawing money. They didn't care about the matches. Now caring about the matches is part of it, maybe too much even. For some old school fans, I even think at times it's like, even with, I'll tell people, it's like, it's not about, it's always better to have a good match than a bad match, but having nothing but good matches is great. And it's a great show, but that's not the answer. The answer is personalities that are larger than life. And You know, just like in fights, it's like having great, exciting fights is good, but you put the two guys who are the most exciting in a fight, and you put Conor McGregor in a fight, and more people are going to buy Conor McGregor than those other guys because you buy for the excitement. Or Floyd, and realistically, like with Floyd, I mean, Floyd wasn't even an exciting fighter, but he made himself larger than life, and he was a bigger draw than the guys who just had great fights every time out.
Do you think? Oh, I'm actually going to go on to a bit of news, if I may, and I've got to ask, 'cause it actually happened today. Your old friend Eric Bischoff, the latest inductee to the WWE Hall of Fame, does he deserve it?
Well, WWE Hall of Fame, there's no standard, so of course he does. So I mean, it's like if you like listed the importance of wrestling, the importance to wrestling of everyone in the WWE Hall of Fame, he would be in the top. I don't know. I'd have to look and say top 10% or whatever, but probably top 10%. I mean, probably right near the top. I mean, there's a few others that you would, Hulk Hogan or something like that you would say, or maybe Austin, and but he'd be up there right near the top. So in that sense, if you compare him to the people in that Hall of Fame, he's way above most of them. So when he got it, I thought, yeah, sure, he belongs.
Do you think he should have gone in?
But I mean, everyone belongs. Everyone belongs, though. Almost.
Do you think he should have gone in with the NWO along with the real mastermind of the NWO, Greg Gagne?
Yeah, I know. Poor Greg. Greg's not in. I don't know why he invented everything. Him and Mike Graham invented everything. But I mean, as far as you could have done it. That would have been fine. It's a WWE Hall of Fame. It's not meant like. Look, I know people who were involved in the process, and they would always tell me, it's like, it's for entertainment purposes. It's to sell. Now it's not this anymore, but at the time it's to sell DVDs. Don't take it seriously. Nobody here takes it seriously. I think that they do take it a little more seriously now than they did then, but still it's like, there's people in there where you just go like, in a wrestling Hall of Fame, are you kidding? And every year there's 3 or 4 of them. It's just basically, we've got a quota. We need this, we need this, and you fill your quota, and that's just how it is.
This is going a bit back actually, because this is actually going back to the 93 book. What do you understand as to how Eric Bischoff actually got the job as it wasn't executive vice president originally, but it morphed into executive vice president? Because I always heard that, I heard once a while ago that he either fabricated some letters of recommendation or got some people quite high up to maybe boost his reputation more than it might have been at the time to get the job. Yeah,
I mean, the story of him falsifying his resume was always out there. I don't know, because I'd never read his resume, so I couldn't tell you if he did or he didn't. But yeah, back then, that was what it was. I mean, it was, I think, wasn't it him and Tony Schiavone were both out for the same spot, and Tony Schiavone had been in the company longer and had way more experience in wrestling. But Eric got it because Tony, at that point in time, as I, really Tony knew baseball and Tony knew wrestling. Baseball was irrelevant to wrestling. So Tony knew the wrestling business, but Eric had, a resume that said he knew television. That's what they wanted, was a guy who knew television and wrestling, because it was a television position. So that's where Eric got that original, that original job, which led to, the period where he was pretty much the top guy in the company.
So on Twitter, I follow 16 people. No one follows me because I never use Twitter, but I do follow you. And
that's crazy.
What is it with Vince Russo, Bruce Pritchard, and Eric Bischoff that they seem to really want to go for you constantly? Because I genuinely don't know the backstory.
I mean, I think that, okay, so we're talking, Vince Russo, I think, is just looking for attention, and he's just doing anything for attention. Bruce, I think it's a marketing gimmick that he stumbled onto, and it worked, so he just kept going with it. And Eric, I think Eric copied Bruce's gimmick, but I do think there's a difference. I do believe that Bruce probably doesn't like me right now, but when it started, I don't think that was the case. But I think Eric has gone so far in the gimmick that I actually believe Eric truly doesn't like me, but I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, it's not like I deal with him. And when I talk to Eric's friends, they'll just go, it's complete gimmick. It's like, but I actually believe that it's more than that. 'Cause he said, you can do your gimmick, but like situations like when something bad happens, you know what I mean? I mean, he said stuff where I'm going like, geez, you're like a real evil, vile person. And Bruce would never, like, you know, if something bad happened in my personal life, Eric would try to dig it in. And like, it's like that, you know, just looks terrible doing it, right? And Bruce would never be stupid enough and have bad enough timing to do that. So that's kind of how I view it. So, yeah.
Because I never really heard about this until they both conveniently had podcasts.
Well, because there was none of that before they had podcasts. And I mean, Russo would have in interviews or stuff may have done that even without podcasts. Bruce never would have. And Eric in his book, like when I read his book, I was kind of like, what's the word? I mean, there's so much in his book that I knew, like every page in his book. I remember I was doing a review of the book, and it's like every page had so much stuff that was either wrong or complete lies, that I was doing this thing, I was going to review it. And then I realized like I'd have to write a freaking book to actually go through this. So I went through like maybe one chapter, found so much stuff that was complete shit. And then I just dropped it because it's just like, and then I remember people in WCW were going like, everything you said was accurate, everything you said. And it's like, I know it was, you know, but, so in the book, you know, there was that, but then after, you know, maybe because it was convenient or whatever, we said, oh yeah, he's the best reporter out there. And then he got the new podcast, and you know, Bruce had already been doing the gimmick, so he went with Conrad, and it was, you know, it started as a gimmick, but I do think that he's kind of a vile person, so I think that it's probably more than a gimmick now. You know, it's, you know, so yeah.
He's worked himself into a shoot, as they say.
He's worked himself into a shoot, exactly. Whereas Bruce, I think Bruce knows the difference.
I will ask one more slightly negative thing because it brought up earlier. I've had my own dealings with Jim Cornette for a few years. I've not spoken to him since early 2019. But I can't imagine falling out with somebody over wrestling direction and opinions on wrestling.
It's not, you know what the funny part is? It's not even opinions on wrestling. I guess it is to a degree. I guess, you know what? It is to a degree. But it really is. It's really over. And you know, the Cornette thing is, I don't know. It really is over Kenny Omega. You know, it's not even over wrestling. I mean, he creates these things. And I mean, I think in his own mind, it's like number one, he doesn't understand modern wrestling whatsoever, which is, I think, part of it. And it's sad because if you talk to anybody about wrestling pre-2005, you will find that there are very few who are smarter than Jim Cornette. I would put him right near the top, not just knowledge, but applicable knowledge, which is, you know, because a lot of people have historical knowledge, you know, read books and everything, but they don't really know the context or understand the business. I mean, he had applicable knowledge of that business. And then, you know, the business changed and he didn't change, and he still doesn't understand that the business always changes. And it's the funny part is that the Jim Cornette of the 80s is 180 degrees different from this Jim Cornette. The Jim Cornette of the 80s, this Jim Cornette would hate the Jim Cornette of the 80s. He would hate the manager with a tennis racket. You know what I mean? I mean, because if he'd grown up 30 years earlier, there'd be no character like Jim Cornette. And he would hate the gimmicks like the, you know, wearing a diaper if you lose the fall and things like that. I mean, he would have despised it, but he doesn't have that perspective to understand that times change. So now things have changed in a different direction and he despises them. And it's funny because like the guys who started this direction, I mean, he was the first guy in the business in the United States, you know, who understood Dynamite Kid and Tiger Mask and Japanese wrestling. And now, you know, because, you know, and he'll have his rationales, but essentially the guys that he hates now are the guys who are the disciples who learned from watching those same tapes and then took it, you know, one step further and made it, you know, more acrobatic and things like that. But it's not even just acrobatic, but they made it, you know, more acrobatic, but more layers and more depth to the match and more thinking about the match, which is the thing that I think people don't understand. Like they'll just go like, oh, it's flips. And it's like, you know, just flips means nothing. You know what I mean? It's like, you've got to hook the people. But when these guys do, whether they use flips or don't use flips to hook the people, you know, he will, he'll try to deny it. You know, like before with AEW, just an example, it was, you know, it was always like, well, if you get the crowd going, I mean, that makes you a good worker. And then, you know, AEW would have these great live crowds. I mean, just loud for everything. That doesn't count because those fans will pop for anything. And it's like, well, what makes them different from the fans when you worked in the Carolinas that would pop for anything? It's like, it's real. Isn't it a good thing that you've got an audience that really loves your product? How is that a negative when it comes to pro wrestling? So it's like you just twist yourself into corners and things like that.
Yeah, I've not really listened to his podcast since 2018. But I heard your Wrestling Observer radio episode where he went on his podcast, right? So correct me if I'm wrong here. He went on his podcast and criticise you for, or the newsletter in general, for having Chris Benoit still in the Hall of Fame, but you went through the same process
whoa. He voted to keep Chris Benoit in, and I voted to put Chris Benoit. I don't know if he said that. I think that might have been Brian Last who was critical, and that's when I thought, yeah, I mean, but Brian probably didn't know that Jim Cornette voted to keep him in. I voted to put him out, but it was basically, we used the Baseball Hall of Fame rules. It's like, what are we going to do? This guy just killed his wife and his son, and he's in the Hall of Fame. What are we going to do? So it's just like, I go, what would happen if this was in a sports Hall of Fame? And baseball, which is the one we copied. It's like, you have to have the amount of votes that it takes to put someone in. You have to have that. So it's 60%. You got it 60% say no, and I think it was 53% no. He didn't get the 60% no, and he's in. Now people are always like, do it again. The results will be different. Like, then I'd be like breaking the rules. The rules are, you can't go in there and go, who didn't like the result, which I didn't, but I didn't like the result, so I'm going to keep doing it every year until I can, until people are swayed to vote for 60% out. No. And it's just like, whatever. I mean, OJ's in every football Hall of Fame, every single one. And, it's like, and no one says it's like, like this horrible thing about the Hall of Fame for wrestling, for whatever reason they do. But it's like, that's the precedent. And there wasn't even a big thing with OJ to vote to put him out. I mean, that was the weird part of the whole thing, is it was like, it in wrestling it's weird. Like, wrestling's got more a moral compass than football, I guess, or something. In some ways it weirdly, the wrestling fans weirdly, maybe not weirdly is even the word, but in some ways the wrestling fans do, because you'll see stuff transgressions and things like that are routine in college football. And if a wrestler does them, they want to blackballed out of the whole industry, or even so. And sometimes it gets ridiculous because, like, I mean, it's like, there's a lot of political views that I don't agree with. I have my own political views on things, but I would never want somebody blackballed out of a business for having different political views than I do. Now, if they're, I mean, if they commit horrible crimes, yes, I get not wanting to do that. And the old business, you could commit the worst crimes in the world, and, Jimmy Snuka, and everyone will book you, and now it would be, I think that if you murdered somebody, it would be a lot more difficult to be booked by every promotion in the world. Whereas Jimmy Snuka, after the Nancy Argentina thing, he worked everywhere, and it wasn't even an issue that he did.
So when did you have the vote to whether to keep Chris Benoit in or out then? Because I'm assuming it was quite soon after.
It would have been the next Hall. It would have been the Hall of Fame election right after. So that was July. So I guess it would have been probably like September, maybe. So it's a couple months later. Yeah.
So I mean, feelings were as raw as they're ever going to get at that time, and he was still voted to remain in. So I don't know what the idea would be to have it done 15 years later or whatever.
Right. Well, now people are a lot, it's just a different world. And now, I mean, I do believe that if I put a vote in now, he probably would get more than 60% out. But, I mean, it's like, I don't believe in revisiting history. I mean, then it just becomes, I'm trying to get something accomplished now that didn't happen when it should have, so to speak. And look, I read so many different viewpoints on that at the time it happened, with and everything. And it's like, a lot of people don't like to look at the arguments on both sides. There is an argument that this happened due to reasons of insanity, which Vern Gagne did the same thing. Granted, he was, much older, but, and there was obviously, no movement for Vern. And I don't know that I accept that was reasons of insanity. I don't accept that personally, but there are people who do. And because of that, it's like he wouldn't have been convicted because of insanity if it had gone to trial, which I don't know that would have happened. Again, I don't think it would have, but it's an argument. It's an argument that you could go with, especially with what they found in his brain. 2 years, a year later, when they examined his brain, that ended up being, what would I say, like that ended up being, a big part of the story later.
It's I think people generally like to look for the easy answer, and it's one thing, and generally, everything happens for a multitude of reasons.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're going to go to Chris Benoit. I don't think there's one reason, but it's a lot easier to do just the brain injury thing because it's easier to pacify. You know what I mean? Because the other stuff just requires, that gets really, the idea that he smothered and killed his son. That one is just like, you can't. I just can never figure that out. I mean, it's like, what kind of a person would do that? Especially because, like, a lot of people who were around him and knew him. You had very pleasant social interactions with him, and there were people who were really good friends of him. And then he did something that, that was pretty, on the standards of heinous and the standards of things that under the worst of circumstances in the world, that's probably right at the top of the list of the things that I can't imagine anyone could, I don't say anyone, but certainly I could never do. That I just never, at all. So it's kind of like how he could do it. I don't understand how he did that. I just don't.
So I'll go straight on, and this is my personal one that I've got to ask. Davey Boy Smith, was he ever in his career world championship material?
Wow. I know WWE wanted to do it with him later, and at that point, I think his body was too broken down. I'm gonna say, you know what? By today's standards, yes. By the standards of the time where he was wrestling, I would say no.
Oh, damn. I was hoping for he grew up 10 miles away from me, dude. So I'm just like, he's my absolute favourite. I always have to ask a question about Davey Boy Smith. Just a couple more then. And this is a bit of a bigger question, and it's probably one that's probably going to be really hard or impossible to answer. Let's say in an alternative universe, you are given the job, and you must do it, the head of WWE. You can change 3 things with the company. It could either be business-wise or direction-wise or production-wise. 3 things only to. I would have
to really think about that one. But number one would be to. So number one would be to allow the guys on television to speak their own words. That would be really high on the list. None of this corporate bullshit. And none of this like memorizing interviews. Okay. So as far as presentation, and in the real world, I would try to do what a real world company would do, as opposed to WWE, which is, they're just different. It's, I guess be more honest across the board, because it's like before, wrestling companies were always dishonest because it was built on a lie, right? The whole thing is like you're pretending that this stuff that's not real is real. Now there's no lie to build on because everyone knows. And, I just feel that again, just things like, not false advertising talent, or, just being a little bit, I'm not saying give away your trade secrets or tell people this is what we got planned next. I wouldn't do that either, but being, I guess, fair to the audience, I would say. And again, not worrying so much about the stock price and, not worrying so much about the stock price. In business, I think that when you run a business, you're taught sort of to do that nowadays because you're a public company. But I think that there's still, I don't know. I would try to be a more moral company. Like in the middle of a pandemic, firing all those people. It's just like, if you had no use for them, then wait 8 months. It's not like the company, like if it was a matter of the company's survival, I could certainly understand it. But when it's not a matter of company survival, having that little regard for your employees, to me, I would have more regard for my employees, way more, for sure.
Right, and I'll end on this one question. I'm sorry, it's going to be a slightly big one. So AEW, I'm going to admit right now, I've never watched an episode of AEW. So all my AEW knowledge comes from you and what you talk about AEW, which is a sort of weird way of going about it. But from what you're talking about, and I realise there are a lot of WWE talent that are currently still migrating over. It sounds to me is sort of going down the TNA route maybe about 10 years ago or even longer. Is that, sort of a word of caution, maybe of using too many celebrities, Well, maybe celebrities as well, but WWE talent.
Yeah, I'm not worried about them using too many celebrities, but WWE talent, sometimes I worry about it. Yeah. I mean, each one's different. It's not like there's a rule of saying like you can have 10 but don't have 11. You know what I mean? It's like each one's different. I think if they bring something to the table that's unique, I would definitely use them. But just what TNA did was, as soon as they're available, you know, even if they had nothing special, we got to bring them in and put them over our guys. That I wouldn't do. Like if you know, if like one of the top guys in WWE, that's whatever. You know, I don't care how many WWE guys you have. If Daniel Bryan, you know, comes in and just goes, my contract's up, I want this schedule and I want to come in. I mean, and you say no, you're an idiot, right? But every Tom, Dick, and Harry, no. And TNA was every Tom, Dick, and Harry, including people that never would have made it there. Whereas, I mean, AEW, I can't say that they've done that, but I mean, I do think that there's too many older people on the television show, and there's not any one that I would say, oh, he's the failure, get rid of him. I just think there's too many. I think I really want to focus. I would want to focus on younger talent and trying to capture a younger audience, and with as many new people so you can watch their story grow from the bottom up, as opposed to guys who are well known and you know, not stars, not hot stars now, and then you try to revitalize them. But each situation is different. I mean, it's not like there's anyone like I would say like, oh, you shouldn't have brought him in. But I do think that I'm feeling there's too many right now, you know. But again, you know, like if Andrade and Zelina Vega, which is a WWE act, if you brought them in tomorrow, I would say, yeah, you know, they have a lot to offer. They haven't hit their peak. I would say, sure. You know, Christian, I had qualms about, but you know, he may prove to be a big success. I wouldn't have so many qualms to say that like, oh, what a terrible idea. I would never say that, but I would say I was, you know, just worried about too many. You know, you don't want I mean, I've seen promotions, TNA and what was the one, AWF, was it the Paul Alperstein promotion, where all they did was build everything around WWE stars from a decade earlier, and it's like that stuff never works. You know,
AWF, was it AWF in New York area?
AWF. Yeah, AWF. So that stuff I've already seen in practice and doesn't work. But you know, you want to mix, and you do want familiar names. I mean, look, John Moxley's been nothing but a home run. Chris Jericho was nothing but a home run. So the idea of not using anyone from WWE, that also was completely stupid.
Who's sort of the MVP of the WWE, the ex-WWE people, and who maybe could you do without?
You mean as far as that are there now? I mean, Jericho and Moxley are definitely the two most important. They're the ones who really helped build the company with Cody too, and the Young Bucks and Omega, who never went from WWE technically, although obviously they had, you know, Young Bucks did a few matches early in their career, and Omega was under contract there at one point. But though, you know, so yeah, those would be the most important. I mean, I don't know that anyone I would say is a failure or anything like that. I mean, Spears
maybe expendable then.
Oh yeah, there's you know, I mean, if Spears wasn't there, nobody would miss him, but they're trying to do something with him now, and maybe it'll work. You know, I can't say he's a failure by any means, but you know, I mean, I could certainly say that like, you know, he hasn't knocked him dead. He did a good feud with Cody at the start, and then kind of just, you know, whatever, laid low. But that was part of that was by design too, because the last 6 months they already had this idea, so they were going to lay him low until, you know, this thing happened.
And I've also got to ask, as someone who's never watched the show, but I know many of the players involved, why isn't Brian Cage the champion? He's massive. He should be the champion. That's just me as sort of a layperson.
Yeah, I don't know. But I do think that, you know, and again, they're switching stuff up with him, and they're probably going to focus on him as a single as opposed to just being the guy on Team Taz. I don't know. I mean, I've watched Brian for years, and he's a really talented guy. You know, you have to get over at a certain level, and he hasn't gotten over at that level yet. If he does, you know, I mean, I got nothing against him, you know, being, or anyone in that position, but he doesn't feel to me like the top guy in that promotion right now. If he goes in there and starts, you know, crowds are there and they start going crazy for him and bringing signs for him, and he sells merchandise and everything like that, you know, yeah, you know, sure, why not?
Right, I'm aware you're short for time, and I will cut it off there. So thank you so much for joining me here. But one thing that you will not realise, and I'm going to bring it up now, is you were one of my inspirations for interior design. And I don't mean like all the papers on the floor and everything. I saw a photo of you in is it New York Post Times?
New York Times. New York Times.
And you had a load of masks on
the
the
office.
wall. Yeah. So
I got masks all over the wall.
All right, I'm going to have to show you. So because I thought it needed to be a bit more wrestling themed.
There you go. Just like my wall is exactly the same with some of those same masks, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, I ended up getting Chinese styrofoam heads for them all because they all sort of flopped off the wall and everything. But
yeah, I got. Do I get that Liger? I got the green Liger up there, and then on this side, I had a bunch of Ligers, but you know what? Like some of them, they just weren't put up on the wall. I had some cool Liger masks. I remember from Liger and Tiger masks. Now I've got. It's funny because when I look now, I got an old Rey Mysterio, but most of these are like 90s freaking. Well, there's the Tiger mask. These are like 80s and 90s masks. Nobody current. I don't. I probably need to update this room for with some more current masks.
Yeah, the only one I've got is Jushin Thunder Liger that I actually bought because it was the only time I went to Japan, and I made a beeline for the shop. And I'm not really a New Japan fan, but it's like the mask is so cool, and I've got to go to the shop and I've got to get that mask.
Yeah. I'm sure that's what I did when I went to Japan too. But most of these I bought in Mexico for like $10 because it was awesome. I would go to Tijuana and just pack them, buy a whole bunch of masks because the price was just so great.
Right, thank you very much. Big Dave Meltzer for joining me, and I will see you again next week, and that's my outro, and I'm sticking to it. Thanks for watching.